My best buddies Jason, Mike, and I were so pumped for our camping trip in October 2014. We're all around 30 years old now, but still love getting out in nature together whenever we can. We had heard rumors floating around for years about Bigfoot sightings deep in the forests of rural Butler County, Pennsylvania. A couple local farmers had reported some tall, hairy humanoid creature lurking around their properties at night. Some hikers told tales of finding huge, unexplained footprints out in the woods. Of course, we figured these were just scary stories spread around to keep people from wandering too far into the remote woodlands. As experienced campers and outdoor enthusiasts, we didn't take the Bigfoot myths too seriously. We decided it would be the perfect spot to set up camp for a couple nights and do some hiking. After loading up my truck with all our camping supplies and gear, we drove out to the trailhead leading into the forested area rumored to be Bigfoot's territory. The winding road through the countryside was lined with burnt orange and yellow maple trees. We couldn't wait to get out on the trail and find the perfect remote campsite. After parking at the nearly empty trailhead lot, we hoisted our heavy backpacks and set out into the looming woods. We estimated it was about a half-mile hike from the trailhead to the secluded clearing we had scouted on a map to set up our camp. We followed the trail that was strewn with fallen, crunchy leaves. It felt peaceful walking beneath the pines and seeing slices of blue sky above us. Since it was midday, sunlight streamed through the trees and warmed us enough so we didn't need to wear our jackets. Our heavy packs slowed us down a bit, but the excitement of finding a prime campsite kept us moving at a brisk pace. When we finally emerged into the clearing, we whooped and cheered at our luck in discovering it. The early afternoon sun shone down on the protected grassy area that was surrounded by soaring evergreens. A small creek bubbled along one side as well. It was the perfect spot to pitch our tents and build our fire pit. We slid off our backpacks and stretched our stiff shoulders and rolled our necks. After gulping down some water, we got right to work. We only had a few hours of daylight left to get fully set up. As the sun began to set, we had our tents arranged nicely and had gathered logs to build up a fire pit. Soon we had a cozy blaze going and were cooking up some hot dogs and beans for dinner. We cracked open a few cold beers and laughed and joked sitting around the warm fire. With bellies full, we decided to have a little fun and playfully started howling out into the pitch-black forest surrounding us. We mimicked wolf and coyote cries, which echoed eerily through the trees. Of course, we brought up the local Bigfoot legends and had a good chuckle imagining how funny it would be if one actually showed up in response to our foolish calls. Little did we know then how bizarrely things were about to unfold. After finishing up our immature howling, we settled back into just chatting comfortably around the glowing fire, contently full from dinner and slightly buzzed from the beers. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows against the closely encircling trees and their branches. Somewhere out in the dark distance, a lone owl hooted. All seemed calm and peaceful. But suddenly, around 9 p.m. by Jason's watch, a piercing, high-pitched screams started echoing from the dark forest. We jumped to our feet in alarm as the shrieks surrounded us from multiple sides. It sounded like wailing cries of anguish, almost human-like, but somehow not quite. The hair on the back of my neck stood straight up. Mike tried to play it cool by joking that it must be Bigfoot announcing its presence to us naive campers trespassing on its territory. But his nervous laughter gave away his real feelings. We were all terrified by the terrifying screams permeating the night air. We anxiously finished our beers and hastily stomped out the fire. None of us were eager to linger outside our tents any longer with those mournful wails ringing in our ears. But even zipped up safely in my tent, it took me a very long time to fall asleep that night. Sometime in the deep dark hours past midnight, I was jolted awake by an odd scraping sound right near my tent. I lay frozen stiff in my sleeping bag, heart pounding as I listened intently. The noise came again, seemingly against a large tree somewhere behind me. I hurriedly grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent flap. My hands shook as I shone the bright beam out into the pitch-black forest. I quickly swept it back and forth, searching for the source, but I saw nothing. Just the trunks of huge pines and an impenetrable blanket of night beyond. No gleaming eyes of prowling animals reflected back at me. But what could have made that strange scraping sound so close to my tent? I zipped the flap back up and just lay there wide awake, listening to the thudding of my heart. Eventually I drifted back to sleep, but it was very fitful after being disturbed and unnerved by the odd nighttime occurrence. When morning sunlight finally crept through the woods again, I emerged from my tent, exhausted. Jason and Mike stumbled out of their tents, looking equally bleary-eyed from lack of sleep. Over a quick breakfast, we recounted our strange experiences in the night. During daylight, we thoroughly searched the area around our camp for clues. About 20 feet up one large pine, we discovered patches of bark that looked scraped and gouged off. Some smaller trees also looked bent and twisted in unnatural ways. Mike suggested it could be from a bear, but the damage seemed too high off the ground for that. Jason jokingly wondered if we had heard the legendary Bigfoot marking its territory in the night. But we all laughed off the ridiculous notion that it could have actually been Bigfoot. Still, we couldn't come up with any logical explanation for the odd occurrences. But the warm sun and fresh morning air pushed away our lingering uneasiness. We grabbed our hiking gear and set off to explore more of the surrounding woods. That night, we eagerly built the campfire up bigger and higher than the previous night, laughing off any weird feelings from earlier. Surely we had just let our imaginations run wild in the dark, unfamiliar woods. We roasted hot dogs and marshmallows while drinking more beers, feeling cozy and content in front of the roaring fire. All our silly Bigfoot theories from the night before seemed foolish now. Mike told us spooky stories about murders in the Pennsylvania woods, but we just laughed while playfully shoving each other on the logs. In retrospect, I wish we had heeded the warning signs and broken camp to leave, but hindsight is 20/20. We were casually chatting and joking around, feeling the buzz from several beers. Suddenly, the woods all around us went dead silent. No crickets chirping, no owls hooting, nothing rustling in the bushes. The abrupt change was jarring and alarming. All our eyes lifted to stare in shock at the gigantic, shadowy figure standing between the trees just outside our ring of firelight. None of us moved a muscle as we gazed wide-eyed at the dark silhouette subtly swaying back and forth. I squinted, trying to understand what I was seeing. The flames occasionally flickered across fur-covered limbs and reflected off two dim points that must have been eyes. Towering at over 8 feet, the creature just stood there, silently watching us as if studying its prey. We were paralyzed, staring back at it, huddled together. The crackling fire sounded deafening in the otherwise complete and heavy stillness. Eventually, Mike abruptly yelled, "Hey!" and grabbed a large burning log from the flames, waving it threateningly toward the lurking creature. I slowly stood up and did the same, brandishing my flaming torch. "Get out of here!" I hoarsely shouted into the night. The ominous figure shifted and turned away, swiftly running off and crashing loudly through the brush until the sounds faded away. The natural nighttime sounds of the forest gradually resumed once it disappeared from sight. We looked at each with wild eyes, breathing heavily. None of us wanted to say out loud what we all were thinking, that we had just seen a Bigfoot with our own eyes. We immediately started frantically gathering up all our gear, not caring that things were getting jumbled and disorganized in our haste. We hastily stomped out the fire, loaded up our packs, and clicked on flashlights. Without exchanging a word, we hurried out of those woods as fast as our legs could carry us. No way were we spending another night anywhere near the creature. We eventually made it back to my truck just as the first glow of dawn lit the sky. Exhausted, we collapsed into the seats. Only then did we finally speak in hushed voices about what had happened. Comparing each of our perspectives, we soon accepted the reality. Some sort of bipedal, ape-like creature lurked deep in the Pennsylvania forests, and it had approached our camp to make clear we were uninvited guests on its domain. Since then, we found a new place to camp far away from the remote woodlands that we now know harbor a very real Bigfoot.